All right, thanks everyone. Will has hit record, so just a note that this meeting is recorded. My name is Ashley Siebold, for those of you that I don't know, and I am here as the chair of the Police Facilities Advisory Committee, and I am supported by several members of our committee. I want to talk a little bit about how we're going to spend our time together tonight. We've got a presentation to run through. We promised you all back at the community gathering in December that we would absolutely get time on the calendar to present to you guys our recommendation to the select board and ultimately what the warrant article will be on the ballot at town meeting on the 12th. So we are here to do that. And then at the end of the presentation, we are going to open it up for questions and answers, for Q&A. This presentation truly is a presentation to you guys of our recommendation to the select board. We want to hear if you guys have questions. We do have questions and answers. If you didn't pick them up, there are sheets, packets over by the stairs over there. But this really is an opportunity for us to share with you what the warrant article will be. The time and place for debating the topic will be town meeting on the 12th, but we do hope that folks have some questions after the presentation. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we want to make sure that you all are well informed and have the right information at your fingertips to be able to vote at town meeting on the 12th. All right, great. Okay, let's dive in. Perfect. Okay, Police Facilities Advisory Committee. Our committee members, myself, Ashley Siebold. I am joined here on my right, your left, by Annie Beck. We've got Jim Casey here. Jeff Hollinger is here. David Keith is here. Bruce Parsons is not able to be here this evening. Phil Sherman is here. Malika Sidmore is not able to join us today. And then Susan Warren is also here. And I would be remiss if I didn't give a huge thank you to the town for their support. We've had quite a bit of support from our select board members, B.B. Casey, Janet Kidder, Bill Helm, also Adam Ricker, Kim Hallquist. Sam Clark has had a chance to walk the land as well. Lynn Lewis has spent quite a bit of time with me, specifically just talking through the tax information, because I know that's super important to all of us. So just want to make sure, and Chief Cobb, who is also not able to be here this evening, but she'll be here on the 8th. But just really big thank you to everyone who has helped us navigate this project. All right. How we got here. So town meeting 2024, there were two warrant articles. The first warrant article 3 was to see about potentially purchasing the house next door. That warrant article was tabled for a later date. And then the warrant article following that was warrant article 4, which was to see if the town would vote to keep the police station at the current location and not spend more town resources exploring, planning for, designing a new police station. And that ultimately was defeated in a secret ballot. So how did we get here? Shortly after town meeting 2024, the select board pulled together this committee and tasked us with looking at what are our options here? And ultimately, there were 4 buckets we could look at. It was renovating the existing space. Could that work? Would demoing the Bucher building and rebuilding on the same footprint, could that work? Could we buy another building in town and rehab that to be the police station? Or could we purchase land and build something from the ground up? So we partnered with Colliers Engineering and LaValle Brenzinger Architects, and they led Chief Cobb through an exercise of really looking at space and needs. And the plan that came out of that exercise is really what drove our work in looking at the different options that we had. So that brings us to where we are today, which is warrant article 3 on the town meeting ballot for this year. What we are asking for is for $955,000 up front. The total cost of the project will likely be in and around 10 million or below. Annie will get into that in a little bit. But the Garvey property came to us a little bit late in our process, which meant that we had exhausted quite a bit of our resources with the two outside partners, Colliers and LaValle Brenzinger. So as part of this $955,000, we want to continue the work to look at the space, look at the land, continue to look at the needs and wants of the building itself, and obviously the outside and all that jazz. So we're just not there quite yet, but that is what we are looking for warrant Article 3. And the warrant article is in the presentation. The presentation will, if it's not already uploaded onto the town website, it will be there. So this will be available for you guys. And it's also, there's information in the Q&A as well. Oh, I'm going to do cost. Nice. All right. So the overall scope of the project is anticipated to cost in and around $10.4 million, and that's per the debt limit recommendation. And several years ago, 4 years ago maybe, 5 years ago, the select board put into place this limit for projects based on that year's current tax projects budget. I'm not sure what it's based on. What was the debt limit based on, Bill?
So 4 former selectmen got together, and we looked at the projection of 10 years into the future of what the needs of the town might be. But the group that did it was not the then selectmen, but myself and 3 other former selectmen.
Awesome, thank you. So we know that we have to stay within $10.4 million for this project. The estimate that came in for this project, and again, I want to be very clear that the Garvey property came to us pretty late in our process, so we weren't able to do everything that we had done for some of the other properties. That's why we want to continue the work. Is we're going to have to do some shaving of the building, of space. We'll also take a look at materials being used. We've had some good recommendations come in from some community members that work within building materials and had some cool ideas. But that's really, we're going to need to spend some time shaving it down from the 14 million that was originally proposed down to 10-ish or under. Again, the initial 955 that we are asking for as warrant Article 3 this year does roll up into that $10.4 million limit. Example of tax burden. So this is for the $955,000 that we are asking for. For a house or a property assessed at around $500,000, the tax burden would be $18.17 per year, and it's a 30-year bond. It would go down from the 1817. Now, in the Q&A, we do have what it would be for the full 10.4, because I know you guys will want to know that as well. Where is it? There we go. Okay. So for the full $10.4 million, a taxpayer with a home assessed for $500,000 would pay approximately $194.17 annually in the first year, and then again, that continues to go down over the course of the 30-year bond. And that is annually. I did check, and it's not per bill. It is annually, so that number will be split up into the quarterly billing cycle. And then once the land is purchased, the remaining funds will be carefully managed to move the project forward. So what does that mean? We know that once we, fingers crossed that this passes and we can move forward, there are some steps that we need to take. We need to have land looked at. We need to have borings dug. We will spend that money in succession. So if we do get to a point, we do not foresee this happening. We've had Horizons Environmental already at the property, and they don't foresee any issues. But in the event something does happen and we say, hey, this isn't viable, we will not spend the rest of that money. The spending stops there. Again, we don't foresee any issues like that. All signs are looking pretty good, but I do think it's worth noting that we are very mindful of spending this money, and if we don't need to spend it, we won't. All right, I'm going to hand it over to Annie.
So the why. In 2018, the Harriman study determined that the facility was not adequate for the current needs of the department. In the fall of 2019, the New London Buildings and Facilities Committee determined that the 2018 New London Police Department Bucher study by Harriman did not include an option that considered the renovation of the NLPD within the confines of the existing building. A subcommittee was formed, and as approved by the Board of Selectmen, Dennis Myers, PA, was retained to study this option. In 2020, the Myers report identified several proposed police requirements that could not be met or were compromised if the department stayed at the Bucher site. 7 years later, the department is still dealing with difficult work conditions such as sewage backups, poor layout, and important and expensive communication equipment in the shared space with water main and sprinkler system. The current facility is not ADA compliant, nor does it meet the current recommendations for law enforcement buildings. Due to the lot size restrictions, bringing the building and lot up to code is not feasible. Again, why? Crime and incidents in New London. New London police officers made nearly 70 arrests for crimes such as domestic violence, simple assault, driving while intoxicated, drug possession, felon in possession of dangerous weapon, theft, trespassing, and various motor vehicle offenses. New London police officers handled an average of 15 motor vehicle accidents every month, including 2 tragic fatalities within a close time frame. Other requests for police service that New London officers handled included, but are not limited to, welfare checks, mental health issues, disorderly conduct, domestic disturbances, criminal threatening, criminal mischief, criminal trespass, directed patrols, a bomb threat, fight, burglary, harassment, missing person, theft, suspicious activity, and motor vehicle stops. So a little bit of everything. Our department, who works 24/7, they deal with a lot more than I think a lot of people are aware of. In order to maintain a high level of safety in our community, we need to provide our police department with a better working environment. Attracting and retaining a quality police force should be made a priority. The Police Facilities Advisory Committee and the Select Board have and will continue to do their due diligence to ensure that this is as cost-effective as possible to meet the needs of the department. To reiterate, renovating Bucher is not a viable option. It is not only cost prohibitive, but the site does not provide the adequate space or security that is necessary both inside the building and the surrounding lot. Security is not only for the officers and department staff, but for the public as well. The Board of Selectmen have begun discussing and making recommendations for demolishing Bucher. The future of Bucher would be decided on by taxpayers at a future town meeting. Location. After careful review of available sites around town, the Police Facilities Committee agreed that a lot on Seamans Road that was offered for sale by the Garvey family would be the best option. Here are some benefits. It's 6/10 of a mile from our current location. Space available to provide the necessary security while being close to Main Street. Better ingress and egress for officers, not a shared driveway with a private home. The ability to provide covered and secured parking for all police vehicles and allow for safer processing. Initial site evaluations, including preliminary wetland delineation, have been positive. So here's a map of showing the current location and the proposed location. So as you can see, it's right down the road. It will be, it's an ideal lot in that the building does not have to sit right on Seamans Road. It will provide a wooded buffer from Seamans Road. The driveway coming in and out, the sight lines are really good. A lot easier to pull in and out of for officers than right here. Yep. Not as dangerous.
And for the public as well. I think the other thing just to keep in mind is that our police force, they're not sitting at the station waiting for calls to come in. They really are mobile and around town. And so I know that there's been some chatter, and I've had some questions come in to me just around the idea, not liking the idea of having the police race up and down Seamans Road from there. And, I think it would probably be pretty similar to now. If they are currently here and there's an accident or a call down on Route 11, they would just be going in the opposite direction as opposed to being at the new location and having a call, and they happen to be at the police station and a call coming in for Main Street. It's just the opposite direction. But for the most part, they are out on the road all day. That's mostly where they respond to calls from.
Okay, timeline. Once the warrant article is passed, the town will complete the purchase and sale agreement with the Garvey family. Initial site work will be done in a carefully calculated step-by-step process to ensure that only the necessary funds are used based on these findings. So as Ashley alluded to before, if something comes up that's not favorable, no additional money is going to be spent. So that whole lump sum is not going to disappear all at once. Initial site and wetland delineations have all looked positive. So, phase 2 will include more precise work to determine the final design that will meet all the needs of the police department while staying in budget. A study of dispatch has been proposed to ensure that space needs will be appropriate. And then this is the suggested timeline. So March 2025, town meeting for funding. Secure agreement for land survey and subdivision will happen pretty rapidly. And then April to July, you can see just the rest of the studies. The geotechnical borings, the drillings to make sure that the land is appropriate. All the surveys, and then the beginning of the design process and what that would look like.
And our hope is that this is a real hope that all of this can happen pretty quickly, so that we have something by next town meeting of next year. I think that would be the goal. Not sure if that will play out. I think we'll know once we get going and get started on things if that would be feasible or not. But I just also want to make sure that you guys know that as this process continues, should the warrant article pass, we will continue to update you guys, and whether it be in forums like this, if this is what works for you all, or if it's, attending our committee meetings or whatever. But we will not go off and do this work in silence. You guys will continue to get updates from us on where things are.
So we encourage voters to pass warrant Article 3 so that we can provide our police force and communications department with an adequate workplace so that they can continue to ensure that New London is a safe and pleasant place to live.
Great. We just want to keep moving this forward. This has been a topic of conversation for quite some time. I think I heard somebody say that they've lived here for 26 years, and this has been a topic for the entire time they've lived here. So let's move this forward here. There is a QR code here if you are fancy and want to use a smartphone, and there's also the website, but all of our project work and also the work of prior committees as well is on the town website. Everything is uploaded there. And also on the website is an email address. So should any questions come up that you would like to have answered, you can send those questions in. We will answer them, and then those questions and answers will be posted on the website as well. We just remove the name of the person asking the question when we post it to the website. All right, so that is it. We want to hear from you all. Again, I know that we had some late arrivals, so just want to make sure that we're clear. This is not a time for debate. The time for debate is town meeting on the 12th, but we do want to make sure that you guys have your questions answered, so you have the right information at your fingertips to vote at town meeting. So if there are questions, we'd love to invite folks up. We do have a full room here, and it is 6:20 on a Wednesday, and I know folks have things to do. So we are likely going to just limit folks to about a minute and a half and only able to get up once. So come once and come with your questions. If it's quiet and we have space, we'll bring folks up. Yes, and just when you come up to the podium, there's a podium here, just make sure that the microphone is on and just introduce yourself. Oh, should be green.
No. I'm Art Scutro. The only information I had to use is the town report from last year, which indicates that there were 20,000 calls for service, and I tried to do an analysis of that, and I see Lieutenant Keith is here, so maybe he can help answer some of my questions. It looks like, as you said, Ashley, they spend all their time on the road. There are only 3 items in here that require a police station, arrests and issuing permits and so forth. So my question is, to what extent of these 20,000 calls do you have to write a report, sit down and do police work? When do you need desk space?
Okay, that's a great question. As far as what type of call for service would require a report, it could be somebody getting bitten by a dog to obviously a full in-custody arrest. It could be somebody reporting that they received a phone call or a scam email and they in turn gave them some money. We could go through
Pretty much
the list.
everything.
Well, no, there's 8,400 patrols in here, so it's got to be somewhere less than 50, perhaps down to 20. Just asking a question, how much desk space do you need?
How much desk space?
Sure, that's when you write a report, isn't it?
Yes. I mean, reports can also be done from the cruiser as well,
Oh, good.
based
Okay.
off with the computer in there.
That helps. The next question is, when is the 2024 police report going to be issued that has this information in it? We haven't seen it yet.
Correct, so it's in the town report, and the town report comes out on town meeting day or before? Week before, so within the next week or two, that is when the town report comes out.
Have you been privy to a draft of it or anything that's gone to the press? I know it's at the press now,
I have not, I don't know if,
so this committee hasn't seen it.
no.
Okay. I think that's all I had to ask.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you so much.
My name is Joe Cubitt. I'm a resident here, and I want to thank you for your work. But I have a question.
Sure.
The communications department seems to be a sticky part of the move in a lot of people's minds. And the select board is going to be looking at, should we be in the communications dispatch business? Tell me why we need to be in the dispatch business and why you need to be next to each other.
Sorry, why, I didn't hear the last
Why
part.
do you have to be in the same building? Why couldn't the dispatch center stay here and the police department move down the street into a smaller facility?
I think I think all of that is on the table. I think that's a great question to ask, and I think once we get to the point where if we do end up doing a study, all of that will be on the table. And certainly as we look at the space, if we do move forward with the dispatch study, that's really going to indicate to us what the space will be needed for in that new building. But I think that's a great
Okay,
suggestion.
Now I want to ask a follow-up question. In the initial drawings that we put out for Bewley property and et cetera, there was parking spaces for 40 visitors and a large conference room. What was the rationale for a 40-car parking lot for public?
So that was based on from Colliers and LaValle Brunzinger of what the industry standards are, of what they've been working on. And for a space, if there's this, what I think it's being called a training room in the plans, which you might have seen, it will also be used as a community room should the community need it as well.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Any other questions? Yep, sure. We got one. Go ahead, Mr. Bowers.
Good evening. My name is Bob Bowers. I'm a resident of New London. I have just 4 questions, but I thought I would just give you all 4 of them, and then you could respond to them after I've listed them, and we could probably save some time that way. The purchase and sale agreement and deeds in the assessor's file state that the property is subject to certain restrictions, encumbrances, and appurtenant easements. Could you tell us what those restrictions, encumbrances, and easements are and how they will affect the town's ownership? The purchase agreement requires that the subdivision shall include the location of a public way for access to the project and to the remainder of the parcel to serve the remaining 17 acres of the seller's property. What is the cost estimate for the town to construct this, and how does it jibe with your concern about the easement at the present site for the owner of the abutting property to drive her car to the back of her property where her garage is? Third, the elevation of this site is substantially lower than the site reviewed on Main Street. How tall will the communications tower have to be to reach the towers on Mount Sunapee? And how much will it cost for that tower and the connections needed? And last, Colliers Consulting has estimated the cost of site work alone at this property at $2,632,400, which, with the approximately $400,000 price of purchase and subdivision, brings the total before building construction itself to $3 million. What analysis did the committee go through to determine that this is a reasonable cost compared to the other sites? Thank you. I'll look for your answers.
Sorry, can you stay there? Thanks. Just, you asked all four, and I don't remember the first two. So something about the ease, the first one was about?
The first one is that the sale is subject to encumbrances, restrictions, and impertinent easements, and I'm wondering what those are and how it will affect the town.
Perfect.
That first part, Bob, is not known yet. That will be done when the title, that's one of the conditions of the purchase and sale. So once the deed is drawn up, there will be an investigation of those kinds of things. And the example the town council gave me was there could be some easement from the 1800s about some farmer being able to use it for haying. Those are kinds of things that are not done until you do the actual title work. Now, the purchase, I'm sorry, go ahead. So,
Well, I have some familiarity with this process myself. And the deeds at the assessor's office specifically refer to a prior deed that lists a couple of the restrictions and encumbrances. And it would be of little difficulty whatsoever for the town to be aware of that in advance as to what does that one document, what does that say? I think that's important. And to refer to appurtenant easements, you may be right. Maybe it takes a full title search. But I think before we spend this kind of money on something, the town should be aware of what it is that's there. As I think that's important. If you're going to wait till you buy it and own it and do a title search or whatever after the vote.
I'm sorry, Bob, I didn't mean to say that the town would buy it and then do the title.
Okay,
This
excuse
would all
me.
okay.
I misspoke. That you want the town to authorize buying it before we even know what they are, I think that's a misstep. Okay. The second question, is that what you want?
Yeah.
The second question was the purchase agreement requires that it shall include a location of a public way for access to the project and to the remainder of the parcel to serve the remaining 17 acres of the seller's property. What is the cost estimate for the town to construct this, and how does it jibe with your concern about the easement at the present site for the owner of the abutting property to drive her car to the back of her property where her garage is?
I'm not aware of any garage back there, but,
Well, I
Go
can
ahead.
at least speak to the issue of
Yeah.
I think one of the questions was the conditions on the purchase and sale. So one of the conditions which Bob has just mentioned is that the town will make the entrance to the new facility a public way as opposed to a private driveway. This will allow the owners of the back property to use that as a public way to get into their property. The public way will not be built on private property, it will be on the town's property leading into the police station.
Yep.
The reason for that is the owners of the property suggested to Adam and I in our meeting that the piece of property that the town's buying is the best spot or the most likely spot for an entrance to the back land. And so the idea is that if the town is going to have an entrance into this new facility, having it be a public way would allow the development in the back, allowing one entrance, one curb cut on Seamans Road.
Yep.
Another condition is that the town must use dark sky compliant lighting for anything outside. And this is because the Garveys are concerned with the neighbors. They want to make sure that any development in that area has lighting that's more in keeping in a rural character. They don't want, big bright spotlights all over the place. So they're thinking about their neighbors for that piece. And the third is that they will retain a right to repurchase for 15 years at the sale, the amount that the town is buying it, $350,000. And that is because they're selling this property to the town of New London. They are not interested in selling it on the open market. So if the town of New London decides for whatever reason that it no longer wants the property, they want the ability to buy it back from the town.
I think just to make it super clear, this public way, we would not be funding the public way through the private property for whatever they're going to do. It is going to stop at the end of the property that we are purchasing. And then they can do what, if they decide later on that they're going to continue that public way, that will happen, but that's not on us. And I think you had a question around the cost.
Let me get back to this,
Okay.
because you haven't actually answered my question, which is, when you put a driveway into a property, it's got a certain cost attributed to being a driveway. When you put in a town access way up to town standards sufficient to meet the requirements for a subdivision of a 17-acre parcel, it has different standards. And the likelihood is there's a cost element that we wouldn't ordinarily have if we were just putting a police station with a driveway. And I'm asking, what's the additional cost for actually building a road sufficient to meet the standards for them to have a subdivision property?
Yep, we can let Public Works Director Sam Clark has
Yeah.
thought about this issue and would be happy to opine.
That was going to be my answer. I know Sam's had some preliminary conversations and has some thoughts.
Hello, everyone. So usually with a public way versus a road, it's really just the width that's going to change. Private driveways would or should be built to the same standard that a road would be built to. The width might be different to accommodate like 2 lanes, but the way the road is constructed is going to be essentially the same exact way. I don't have a cost per foot for length or width of a road, like off the top of my head, but it would just be a width. And we're talking something probably from a private like driveway, which would be 18 feet, or like an access, or for a town road that might be 22 feet wide. So it's not really a huge difference.
Okay, good. And the second part of that question is, how does this jibe with your concern about the easement for one car versus a driveway for a potential subdivision?
I don't want to speak for the other members. I don't have any concerns right now because I feel like much of that is going to flush out in phase 2. I don't think we have enough information right now to make an opinion, but I would also look to my committee members here to see if they, yeah.
The third was the tower. It's a much lower elevation. You're going to have a much taller tower. The estimates that the Colliers went through were based upon estimating a 100-foot tower. If you go look at the elevation on that site and try to reach Mount Sunapee,
Yep.
You've got, it looks to me like a fairly substantial tower. Have you figured out how tall that is and how much additional cost is involved?
Yeah, great question. And I do believe that this came up at the winter gathering as well, this question on how high the tower would be. I don't think we have that information yet. I do know that Chief Cobb had talked to the it's Beltronics, and they needed to get out there to walk the property and then come back to us with how high it would need to be.
Okay, but it will be substantially higher and will have an additional cost.
We'll find out in phase 2.
And then the last one was, how did you compare the total cost, which I put at $3 million, and you can ask what you want about that, to the costs of preparing the site for the other sites that might be available?
I was going to say, there we go.
So Bob, again, the other sites that have been examined, as you well know, over the last few years, all had significant costs associated with them. Also, it is the position of the selectmen, and I've not heard Ashley or her group say differently, that this next phase is going to be looking at what can be done to fit into a $10.4 million budget. I believe the numbers that you're referring to came off of a sheet that was prepared a few months ago by Colliers. All of those numbers are obviously larger than we expect the
Yeah.
project to cost. As Ashley has made very clear, the first goal here is to acquire the site. We are very fortunate that we have a longtime town resident who's been willing to make this property available to us. Of all the sites that have been looked at by your committee and others over the last umpteen years, there isn't a site as viable as this site for a police station. So the goal on March 12th is to get approval to buy the site and enough money to do some of the additional work that you're talking about and stop. The only additional money that can be spent will be by the next town meeting and the next town meeting. You're asking a lot of great questions,
Yeah.
all of which are part of why $955,000 is being asked for.
Yeah.
Okay. So my point was simply that you're talking about 3 million instead of Bewley at 375 plus 1,700, 2 million. So it's $1
Bob,
million
you're
more.
down in the weeds of the numbers.
Yeah, we're not there yet.
Okay.
You're
right.
down in the weeds of the numbers. Please trust the selectmen, trust this committee, that when we say this is the project, the goal for the project is $10.4 million, and there's a lot of work to be done, but if we cannot acquire the site, there's no sense in going any further, and we can be back another year with another site, another committee, another discussion, and so on. I have yet to hear anybody say what the alternative is to doing this particular project at this time, and it's time for the taxpayers to have the opportunity to vote to acquire this very unique and very usable site.
Okay. So long as everybody knows how much it's costing.
We don't know. Are there any other questions? Yeah.
Winfried Fenneberg, New London. Obviously, New London. This is just a technical question. From what I remember on the presentation, 955 is part of the potential max that the town can spend.
Sure is.
I would imagine it's going to be a bond issue to finance this whole thing. Is the 955 part of the bond, which would require probably a 3/5 majority on the vote? Or is it a separate warrant article that is requiring only 50% for that expense?
No.
So you're looking for 60% of the vote?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Yes, Rich. Oh, Peter, you can. You're after.
Rich Epstein, resident. I have here the probable cost document from Colliers in December, and it has 3 of the properties that were assessed. Absent, of course, is Bucher, which is interesting in itself. But for Newport Road, it had a cost of just over 12 million. Meanwhile, the Garvey site was over 15 million. So we're talking about a $3 million.
May I interrupt again? Rich, did you just hear what I said to Bob? $10.4 million.
I'm going to get to that.
No, excuse me.
I'm going to get to that.
Excuse me.
I'm going to get to that.
Okay.
Thank you. So, so we're talking about a $3 million difference. To a lot of people, and it's a 25% increase. To a lot of people, that's a lot of money. And yes, okay. So now we're told it's going to get reduced to 10.4. So we have to look at now how much, now they're both incremental above, these are kind of equivalent buildings, just at different sites. Now the incremental cost for Newport Road was only 2 million over the 10. And while the Garvey site was 5 million over. So to be able to reduce the project and fit into the 10.4, you have to reduce based on these costs. So somehow you've chosen Garvey. I guess I'm trying to understand why you didn't go back to Newport Road when you learned about all of these costs. And it's 2.5 times more incremental impact back on the site, given the costs from this document. So
I think
trying to
Annie's going to answer.
Okay, so first of all, when Colliers put those numbers together, the Garvey site was the last one to come in. They didn't have a lot of the information. So there were definitely some overages built into those line items, especially on the site work. But as I mentioned, wetlands delineations, the initial ones have been done, and they show positive. They were thinking that it was going to be a lot worse, Colliers was initially. So they put in a lot of extra money into that site work. So I would not read too much into that, first of all. Second of all, you know, we have these numbers are suggested that as if we do not have a public works department that can do site work. So, you know, we have the ability to get some of this work done at a wholesale level versus a retail level.
Yeah.
So we will do our due diligence and make sure that this work is done within the budget.
I think the other thing to think about for the Newport Road site, so just so everyone knows, the Newport Road site is the plot of land directly across the street from the post office. That's the land that we're talking about. Newport Road is a state road. There were a ton of expenditures that were going to have to be on top of our work that we weren't sure what that was going to cost. The state could mandate that we put in a traffic light at Hannaford's. They dictate where driveways would be. They would dictate curb cuttings and what we do. Those were significant costs that we weren't sure where those were going to land. And then we heard that there was just some opposition from community members on that site, that it would probably be a really hard sell.
Okay, so it sounds like you're saying that it was an overestimate somehow?
Absolute.
So can you share the information that is now, what is the current estimate for Garvey?
10.4 million.
Well, okay. But to get an equivalent site, because
That will all be part of
will all
phase
tell
2.
how much we
Yep.
have to eat into.
You're exactly right. So that is exactly what we will flesh out in phase 2. And then what we can do, Rich, and what I'm hoping we do, is have that exact same piece of paper that you have there with the properties, and Garvey is added on with the actual costs.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure. Yes, Peter.
Good evening. I'm Peter Nichols, resident and also on the Housing Commission in the town of New London. Thank you for your good work and careful consideration. This is hard to do, and I applaud your effort. What I wanted to say tonight is relating to a statistic that has been put forth by the Housing Commission's consultant in doing a study of what the town needs potentially for housing going forward, and that's really my lane. And I think there's been some misunderstanding about how that index and ratio is being used. It's been written and also, I think, intimidated to this evening. The ratio is 34% of cost burdening in the community. And like any ratio that's used to analyze a very complex issue like housing and demographics, if it's taken by itself and applied, it can give an indirect and incorrect picture, particularly when it's applied out of context. I think the inference is that 34% of our community is financially strapped, and that just isn't the case, and let me explain. First, the definition of cost burdening as an index is gross income divided by the cost of home ownership. Well, what is the cost of home ownership and what is gross income? That's, as I've heard my good friend Rich Epstein say, that the devil's in the details, and we need to drill into that a bit. If that ratio is greater than 30%, then the household is cost burdened. So if as a household 30% of gross income over the cost of your income is applied to home ownership, then you are cost burdened. The flaw in the application lies in the limitations of the available data and the inherent assumptions that have to be made to create it. For example, the index is based on federal data from the census, income reported to the government. That's it. They can only deal with what's available publicly. For households over 65, that means Social Security, monthly pension if you have it, interest and dividends if it's there. And that's it. It does not include asset wealth. It's not counted. There's no data. So therefore, excluded are savings. It's the nest egg that retired people like myself have put away for years and years, planning for retirement. Hopefully it'll be enough. And it's hard-earned savings that we work for, and that's part of the American dream. It excludes stocks and bonds and other investments if you've been lucky to have them, and 401k information. The other problem is that the cost of ownership is the assumption that's based on current values and mortgage rates that are high. Owners may have bought the home a number of years ago. Many of us did, not me in New London, but many of us have. So the home equity assumption is also incorrect. Over time, owners may have paid the bank mortgage in part or in whole. They may even own the property free and clear. That's part of the plan for retirement, if you can make it. And maybe they've even paid cash for the property from savings. So because these data limits and assumptions are too great to use the index as a standalone indicator of financial hardship, it was created more as a comparative tool to look at other communities. So what do we know? We know that from our study with the consultants, we know that 90% of New London housing units are single-family homes. We also know that 91% of the homes are owner-occupied, so there are not many rentals. Using the defined ratio, the largest segment affected are those households over the age of 65. While some of these may experience the financial challenge over 30% of income, many others have accumulated wealth, maybe not a lot, maybe a lot, such as home equity, retirement savings, or other assets, not reflected in annual household income. This highlights a limitation in the data. Households with assets no longer report traditional income, making the ratio more useful as a comparative tool to other towns rather than a true figure of household finance. Other New Hampshire towns with comparable demographic profiles to New London have similar cost-burden ratios. We are not unusual or alone amongst other New Hampshire communities with a good quality of life. In conclusion, cost burdening is a real condition, and surely it is a challenge for some residents, but it's not simply 34% of our households. Statistics such as tax or mortgage foreclosures, tax delinquency, and rental evictions would provide a much more accurate picture. I would encourage further research in those directions. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Any other questions? Yes, Celeste.
Is this on?
It is.
I'm going to follow up on Peter. I'm Celeste Cook. I'm the welfare officer in New London. I've been the welfare officer in New London for 20 years. I've had one request for help with a mortgage payment. One request for one payment. We paid it. She paid us back. Okay? I have not heard that there are all these people living in New London that are not able to pay their taxes. Okay? I applaud what you've been doing, this committee. I think it's terrific. I think we owe the police a decent place to work.
Thank you. Colin? You all right?
Yeah, my back hurts. Colin B. is a resident. I just, a couple of comments. I was going to be quiet today, but I can't. Statistics are an interesting thing. I would suggest that we do need to be careful with statistics. I would also suggest that unless we're suggesting to our citizens that they should liquidate their assets to afford cost, then in fact, federal income is indeed what you should be looking at. And that's what that statistic is representing, as Peter said. Yes, people have stocks, they have bonds, they might be accruing interest and dividends, that becomes income. They might have equity in the house. Are we asking them to sell their house or to do a reverse mortgage to stay here and live? So yes, it's very important, but we can't slant our review of statistics to the other side by saying that it's irrelevant. All that information is important. I think what's critical for all of us is to understand there is a segment of the community that does have pain. And they may not get to the point where they're going to Celeste for help, but there is that, and I talk to them. Maybe I talk to different people than you talk to. Some people in this town are having pain paying their taxes. Some people may be wealthy, but they're also dealing with the issues associated with, I call it gentrification. They're being driven out because their taxes are getting too high for them to afford where they are. So those are all variables that we should just be aware of. We should just be aware of it. And I had another comment, but I forgot about it, so I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thanks, Colin. Any other questions, comments? Yes, Karen. Yep.
Good evening, Karen Epstein. One of the things that I have in mind here, and it's not been brought up, and it's not directly related to the police facilities assessment, but it has to do with something really important in town, and that is water. And I think that's been on a lot of people's minds. It's been certainly a topic of late as water precinct is in litigation with Twin Pines, and I think we've all gotten a recent update on where that stands. So, you know, a perspective that I have is that's a very big concern, and that could be have very big financial implications for the town.
Yep.
So in terms of keeping things in perspective and keeping things in scope, I think that is something that we all
Yeah.
have to keep our eye on. I think at a recent PFAC meeting back in January, the chair of the Board of Selectmen made a mention of the impact of that, those projects not coming online, and that it did impact the potential or what was being considered in terms of the tax base. And I would also throw into the mix, too, is something that was sort of new. It was discussed, I think, in the late summer into the fall, and that is the identification of contamination along Newport Road. And so we don't know of the full scope of that, and I wonder, as just a person in the precinct and in town here, as to what that full scope is and if that may have an impact indeed
Yeah.
on the potential of expansion of
Yeah.
what water source. So I just put that out there as something that we're all going to, I certainly will have in the back of my mind as I consider all
Yep.
this. So thank you very much.
Yeah, and I think, you know, we've heard from the water precinct, we're probably multiple years out from having to pay for anything, if anything at all, I believe, and please keep me honest, Select Board, but they are doing studies now. Their next annual, it won't be ready, the results of that wouldn't be ready until later this year, and then they would need to vote at their next board meeting next year. So we're probably several years out from us, and taxpayers would have to vote at town meeting for us to vote, for us to pay for anything. So we hear you, absolutely.
And the other piece of that, of course, it is, as you talked, it's years out, but the development of a supplemental supply would be not something that would come online very fast. So just to have that long
Yeah.
in mind, so I just put that
Yep,
out there. Thank you very
absolutely.
much.
And I think in the FAQs as well is a list of the current bonds and when those are rolling off. So, you know, I feel like this is sort of normal life, that bonds roll off and then new things come on, and I feel like that will just continue. But our hope is that we can get this passed and get this going before we have to pay for some other big ticket items. The last thing we want is for all of it to happen at the exact same time. That would be really tragic. Yes, Ginger.
Good evening, I'm Ginger Millord. I have lived happily in my house at the corner of Seamans and Sargent for over 30 years. And when this whole thing came up, this particular location, I said, I'm not going to be a NIMBY, not in my backyard, although it is quite literally, I am the closest residence to the police station. That's not quite accurate. I'm the closest continually occupied, because my neighbor is for the past couple of years, has been living in a lovely retirement home continuing care home in Vermont, so her house is empty. Her house is a little closer literally than mine, although some of my property is as close. I think I really have to commend you all for the work you've done. And it's been a battle, and it's been very hard, and I think I was very happy to hear about the Garveys wanting to have the lower lights. And tonight you talked about a wooded buffer. I'd like to know more about that. Because at this point, my concern is aesthetics. I'm not the least bit interested in challenging this. I think it's wonderful. And I think the people involved who have worked on this deserve our thanks and appreciation. So that's all I wanted to say. It's just that I'm happy. I guess it will require rezoning. The way the college has a special zone, that area is rural residential. So.
Yeah. Adam?
Yep. There's no rezoning required for the governmental use.
Okay. I didn't know. Because I know that the college, commercial is one kind of zoning. And all right.
Right.
Anyway,
government, we get some different
So
rules.
that's all I wanted to say is thank you. And my concerns are aesthetic.
Yeah, I think that's also a lot of our concern too. I think we've already had some initial conversations just around hoping that we can keep most of the stone wall, keep a ledge of trees between the stone wall and the new building so that it's not this big shiny object right on Seamans Road, that right of way, that road going in will be set back a little further. These are great questions and comments. Anything else? Yes.
Hello, everyone. Again, thank you to the team, the committee for doing all this. I know some of you, many of you I don't know, but at least one or two of you I do know.
Can you introduce yourself?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm Tom Forster. I'm a relatively new resident to New London. We've lived here about 2.5 years now, but we've heard about this at each of the town meetings. I'm sure we'll hear about it again this year. I just have a quick question. I mean, I hear the 10.4 million number. I think that's a good number. But what happens? I mean, that's a big cut. There's some big cuts that are going to have to be made, potentially compromises. What happens potentially if it can't be met? I mean, what do we then? Do we then own this piece of property as a town and have to go look elsewhere? Or you said something earlier, I didn't quite follow it, about that the Garveys have a right to buy it back. How does that work?
Yeah, Kim, do you want to talk a little bit about the conditions? Yeah.
Right. So let's say this first phase, the $955,000 is passed. The preliminary work is done, and they come to some conclusion that it's going to be wildly over the 10.4 million. I think when the request for funds went to town meeting, townspeople would say, hey, you said it's going to be X, now you're asking for this. They may say no. If they do, if the town says no to building the station, or they stop because of the preliminary work, the town would then decide, or voters would decide, do we want to keep this piece of property, make it a park, make it whatever, or do we want to sell this property? The town, as owner, could sell the property. First step would be to contact the Garveys, as we mentioned earlier. They are interested in purchasing it back. For a period of 15 years, they want at least the option to purchase it back. So at any time, this would be town property just like all the other property the town owns. It's really up to the voters. Do we want to invest money and do something else, or do we want to sell it? Or do we want to just leave it so that we can walk on it and picnic on it, or whatever?
Okay, so if you were to sell it back to the Garveys, you would be out the expenses that we've incurred during all that time, but then it goes back, they have a right of first refusal.
Correct, assuming they wanted to purchase it back. They could say we don't want to, and then the town could decide to sell it at, whatever amount they wanted.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
Good, thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks again.
Yes.
Hi there, my name is Cynthia Rusas. Thank you for all the work that you've done. I'm somewhat new to New London, so this is a little bit new to me, but just had two questions. The first one is there a possibility of having an option to purchase the property after a lot of the work that you're discussing that still needs to be done regarding costs is actually solidified? It sounds like there's a lot of urgency to purchase, but the owners really only want to sell to the town. They're not marketing the property. So is that a possibility, and why aren't we considering that?
That's a great question. I might punt this over to Adam and Kim, but my initial thought is the amount of work that would need to be done. I would hate for us to do all of that to a plot of land and then say, oh, just kidding, we're not going to buy it, and then leave them with a plot of land that has borings dug and all sorts of stuff. But I'll see what Adam and Kim have to say.
Yeah, I suppose it's always a possibility that an owner would allow some work done on, and that's something the selectmen could explore if they had the ability to go to that next step. I mean, again, you're right, the Garveys are doing this out of, because they value the police department in the town and they want to see a new station. So it's possible. How far, what kind of intrusion on their land that they would allow, and then have the town walk away from it, that would be the question.
Yeah.
And you would save potentially the costs that would be associated with buying and perhaps selling and marketing and that sort of thing down the road. The other question that I was a little confused about was someone that had questions asked about a $2.5 million cost for preparing the site. I was trying to understand what that number was. There was a total of a $3 million, and is that part of the 10.5, or can someone explain where those numbers come from?
Yeah, so I think what he was referring to was another site. We don't have that cost yet, but that would those costs that he was speaking of would be encompassed into that 10.4 million. We don't know what those will be yet. We'll know once we get started on phase 2 and be able to flesh out.
What's a specific number, though? I don't know where that number came from.
It was
the high for the site preparation and not the building, so that would be before a building's even built.
It was from the Collier's report, and as I mentioned, it was because the Garvey site was late. They didn't have a lot of the background that they had with the other two sites, so they sort of overestimated some of the site work. So it's a line item, but we really, everyone's fixating on certain things, and I really don't think we should fixate on that
when we have
site
the
work,
actual.
because we will provide the town with the actual figures once we get to phase 2. It'll be a breakdown within the $10.4 million, but it's not going to be over and above. So.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure.
And again, just to reiterate, our friends in Public Works we'll be able to leverage them for some of the work as well that will decrease the cost. Anything else? Bill?
Are we near the end?
I think we are.
I would suggest that people leave tonight with 3 thoughts, okay?
Great.
This has been a process for how many years?
Yeah.
This Board of Selectmen and this committee has been listening all year to input, and things have changed as the year has progressed, as we've responded to that. So, number 1, we finally have a site that even the closest neighbor says is okay. Wow. Years of not having a site, and the closest neighbor says it's okay. Thank you, Ginger. I'll pay you later. Number 2, we heard along the way that some of these numbers that we've heard bandied around here tonight just weren't going to be acceptable. There are members of the committee sitting here who said to us and to you, all of you, we can't do that. And we came back and we said, we're going to take a look at our fiscal policy, and we're going to put a limit on this, and we're going to go forward living with that limit. If we change that limit, it's because the taxpayers vote to do so. So we have a site finally. We have a cap on the spending, those 2 things. And third of all, the Bucher site is off the table. It's been proven by multiple professionals that it is not an adequate site to spend any money on it, would not be smart. And at its most recent meeting, the selectmen discussed that probably the right thing to do is to demolish that building. So we have a site, believe it or not. We have a cap on spending, and the Bucher issue is off the table. All the rest of it is what we're asking for the $955,000 for, which is to take it to the next step. And again, the voters will vote on that. So all of the stuff that's a year old, 2 years old, 5 years old, 7 years old, put it aside, because we've been trying to respond as we've gone along, and this is where we are. Site, a cap limit, and no Bucher.
I should have said at the beginning, but when coming out of the town meeting, 2024 town meeting, we heard loud and clear from the residents, come back to us with a real plan, come back to us with an actual property that's viable, and present it to us, and here we are. So, I hope this has been beneficial. If you do have any other questions, if you're anything like me, I leave meetings or forums, and 3 days later I have all these questions in my head. Please feel free to email. If you go to the website up above, there is an email listed there. It will help us also understand what you guys are thinking about. So if warrant Article 3 does pass, we have these things in mind, and also help us for the next community forum on the 8th as well. If there are questions that you guys have that weren't addressed, we can answer them in the next forum as well. All right, thanks everyone for coming. Have a great night. See you at town meeting.